Welcome to Follow Your Curiosity. Ordinary people, extraordinary creativity. Here's how to get unstuck. I'm your host, creativity coach Nancy Norbeck. Let's go. Novelist Michael McLaughlin trained as a doctor for more than a decade before deciding that medicine wasn't where he wanted to be after all. He moved back into his first love, fiction writing, in stages, first doing medical communications before deciding it was time to write fiction full-time. Michael tells me how and why he made that shift, including how he wrote his first book on career change before jumping into the world of long fiction. We also talk about how he draws on his medical background and combines plotting and writing by the seat of his pants to get the best results in his work. Here's my conversation with Michael McLaughlin. Michael, welcome to Follow Your Curiosity.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So I start everybody out with the same question, which is, were you a creative kid or did you discover your creative side later on in life?
I think I was a pretty creative kid. When I actually started writing when I was a little kid, I was probably like 10 years old when I wrote my first book, somewhere in that 10 to 12 range or so. And I've always liked stories, and I've always liked doing art projects when I was a little kid. I think I kind of channel that in different ways now. But yeah, I think as a kid, I was always interested in artistic things.
So were you encouraged to pursue that kind of thing, or did you have the kind of family that was like, no, that's a waste of time, you shouldn't do that?
You know what? I think we're encouraged in general. I think on my own, I kind of gradually figured out I want to do something scientific and go into medicine, which on the surface kind of seems like the antithesis of doing something artistic. So I never really tested my parents, I think, to see exactly how they would have reacted. But, I think they're realists. So I think they probably would have had something to say about some of the financial challenges. And I've definitely felt that along the way as we talk a little bit more about my career choices along the way. Some of those were financially restricted to some extent.
Sure. So when did you start to think science was more your thing?
Probably in my early teens. I got into high school, I guess. I really started to like science courses. I liked English too. I've always liked the two. I've liked reading and writing and science since probably my mid-teens. And then by the time I was about 17 or so, I decided I wanted to be a doctor. And then from that point on, for a while, I really heavily focused on the science.
Yeah. So it's an interesting thing because, as you mentioned, people tend to think that science and the arts are antithetical to each other. And I don't really think that is true at all. I think there's a lot of creativity in science and math and things that we tend to shove into the left brain, non-creative part. And I'm wondering what that was like for you. Did you keep writing when you were in high school, even though you were in a more science direction? Did you balance it, or did you kind of switch over? Or
yeah, that's a great question. I really balanced it. I think when I was in college, my favorite courses were my Shakespeare courses and my creative writing courses. So I took a poetry writing course and really kind of figured out that I wasn't a poetry person, I guess. I think I don't understand poetry well enough, and I certainly wasn't writing it well enough for my own taste. But I took a short story writing course in college, and that was definitely my favorite course, despite all these biology, chemistry, physics, everything else that I was taking, most of which I really enjoyed too. I really liked the creative writing course. It was the short fiction course was only about 12 people. It was really interactive, and everybody gave each other feedback each week on the writing. And I just enjoyed, I think, not just the writing and the creative part, but also that interaction with people. And I learned a lot from seeing other people's writing and really starting to critique it and think about it in that way, and just interacting and needing to express outwardly what I thought about the writing and why. And that's very difficult. That's still, I think, difficult for me and for a lot of people. You read things and you know what you like sometimes, but it's hard to express exactly why you liked it.
Right. Right. And and it's kind of interesting to me too, because I'm not always sure that quantifying those things is helpful. I think that we get caught up in the whole we must measure everything kind of mentality. I'm like, why?
Right. Yeah. So I did a couple creative writing courses in college. I wrote short stories when I was in college, and then in medical school, I continued to write short stories. And then as we had kids, and when I say short stories, at that point, most of those were kind of funny anecdotes, especially as we started to have kids and raise kids. There are just so many kind of mind-opening, strange occurrences that take place. And so I wrote a lot of those. I wrote a good number of just these funny anecdotes that I shared with family, and most of which I never even tried to get published in any way. They're just kind of in the back drawer, and every now and then I pull them out and I share them with my kids as they get older to entertain them, or I don't know. Sometimes they're more annoyed than entertained. I'm not really sure, but it entertains me, so maybe that's that's almost as important, I suppose.
Well, I mean, that's kind of the whole point of doing something creative, and I think there are people who would object to the word entertain, but I think if you're not having fun, why are you doing it?
Right. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So you went to med school. You went through, I mean, how long were you in med school and residency and all of that?
A long time. So I was in med school for 4 years, and then I did 6 years of residency after that. Med school I did at Columbia, and then I stayed on there, and I did 3 years of general surgery residency, 2 years of plastic surgery and reconstructive surgery, and then I did 1 year of hand surgery and microsurgery after that. So yeah, a long time, a whole decade of my life, not to mention the time spent before that and some time after that once I got into practice.
Yeah. So obviously there was an appeal there. So what was it that got you there and kept you there aside from just I like science?
Oh, I wanted to be a surgeon from an early age. I knew that I wanted to do that specifically, and I kind of changed a little bit as far as what type of surgery I like doing. But I like I guess I like seeing problems and fixing them, and I think that's in surgery that's what you do, and you do it in a really meaningful way for people. You can really have an impact on people's lives, and so you get kind of a combination of a problem to fix, a challenge for yourself, and then also the outcome of being able to do something good for people. So that really drew me to going into medicine and going into surgery specifically.
Well, and it's interesting that when you say that it gives you the opportunity to help people, I find it kind of fascinating that you've gone from hand surgery to writing. As someone who has had carpal tunnel surgery on both wrists, it seems kind of fitting and slightly ironic.
I fixed many hundreds of those.
I'll bet you
Yes.
did. I am deeply grateful to the person who fixed mine.
Sure.
So when did you start to think maybe this wasn't what you wanted to do?
I was probably about, I don't know, halfway into my residency. I started to wonder a little bit. I had a couple of friends who were in the program with me who went on to do other things, who left the program that I was in. And, I was so on a track, and it's, I was so busy. I was working so many hours that it was hard to even think outside of the box that I was driving further into during the residency program. But I also, I really enjoyed the individual things that I was doing. But, I really started, I got married. We started to have kids. I started to wonder whether from a, work-life balance standpoint, there might be something better for me. And then as I got into practice, I remember thinking, oh boy, let's see how this goes. I remember signing the contract, and starting working, and I had great experiences with the patients that I worked with, and really enjoyed the being able to help people and doing the surgery and all that. But a lot of what I was doing was outside of what I thought a doctor would be doing. There's a lot of extra, just paperwork work and just non-patient time, non-surgery operating room time that really starts to consume you. And so with that, and with really at times feeling like I was working around the clock and having trouble again balancing work life, I decided I really started to second guess things and wonder whether I should do something else. And after about 2 years into practice, I decided to change gears and to think about either an alternative practice type or an alternative career. And I spent about 2 years, took a long time to try and figure out what else I could do. And it's funny at that time I was about 2 years into what ended up being 4 years in practice. And I thought, well, what do I really want to do? And what I really wanted to do was be a novelist at that time. That was my dream job. But that was the point. I mentioned some financial considerations. At that point, I had a family, I had a wife and two kids. And by the time I left practice, my wife was pregnant with our third daughter. And so financial considerations were real at that point. So even though I never went into surgery with financial considerations in mind at all, when I was looking to change careers, I really had to consider whether I could, have a salary on a regular basis consistently, right, and to the amount that we were looking for. So, even though I kind of kept the novelist idea on the back burner as I looked at other types of careers. And at that point, I found out that I could combine my scientific and medical interests and passion with a passion for writing and go into medical writing. And so that's what I did. Once I found out that I could combine those and basically write for an industry called medical communications, which in our case supported pharmaceutical companies in their writing needs, I had an epiphany. I couldn't believe that I could combine those two sides of my brain, like you were saying, and combine really my two passions to find something that I think was really a second true calling for me after going into medicine.
And I'm sure that a lot of people said, "Oh, this is the absolutely perfect thing for you because it combines those two things." I mean, when I finished undergrad, I had done a lot of, student employment in the computer center, doing tech support and things like that. And that's exactly what people said. Like, "Oh, you should be a technical writer because it combines your technical writing is not that interesting."
Right.
I discovered, it's like, yeah, it sounds good on paper. And it did give me a passion for writing very clear documentation for things. But ultimately, it was just not something that I was going to want to do forever. And I'm guessing that you may have experienced the same thing.
Yeah, well, there are, even within what I did, there are a lot of different types of medical writing, and some are more dry, from my perspective, in my opinion, more dry than others. And when I started, I actually did, it was kind of a mix. It was very scientific, but it was also initially working with marketing teams. So it's a little bit more creative. I was working with artists. I was working with copywriters in addition to the scientific writers that I was working with. So it's kind of a blend. But then as time went on, I got further and further into more pure scientific writing within this career. And as I was doing that, I would come home, and late at night after the kids were in bed or whatever, I would start to, I'd try and write some short stories. I even wrote a couple of books over those years, a couple of novels, and actually a book about changing careers. I just squeezed in that time because I just had this need to get these additional creative thoughts out of my head.
It's funny how that works. And I feel like I should issue a caveat about my statement about technical writing. It was not that interesting to me. There are plenty of people who do it and love it. And that's awesome. And we're very glad that they exist. But yeah, it's really interesting to me, that so many people do manage to do creative work in the little nooks and crannies of time that they can find. And yet so many other people say, "Oh, I'd really like to be an artist, but I don't have the time." And I'm not saying that to judge anybody, but there does seem to be, certain people are just pulled strongly enough by it that it's like, I don't really have time, but I'm going to find some, even if it's 10 minutes here and 10 minutes there. And it's always interesting to me to hear how that works out for folks. It clearly seems to have worked for you ultimately.
Yeah, it's I just needed to do it. And I knew that I had to carve out the time somehow. And no matter how I did that, it's like exercise, everybody's kind of wants to exercise, and either you figure out a way you're going to get it done or you don't. And I think writing is a lot like that. And just to give you a sense, the first book I wrote was about changing careers. The way I wrote that book was I had an hour and a half commute each way to work for many years, actually. And I dictated that book while driving. And then originally I did it on a dictaphone that I just had next to me sitting on the passenger seat. And then after I dictated it, I brought it to a transcriptionist that I had worked with previously. She transcribed it. This was back in the old days with little tapes. She had these little like a cassette tape. And so she transcribed it, and then I edited it further. But that's how I squeezed it in. I found, and I did this a lot, and I continue to do this. If I have downtime that's not enjoyable for some reason, I try and somehow convert it to something positive. And so in those drives, it was, it could just be completely mind numbing, and sometimes it is. But in this case, I figured out a way to actually read a book while I was stuck in traffic. And that was easier to do with that particular book because I set it up as more of a Q&A, and it was all in my head, and I just needed to get it out of my head. It's very different than a novel. I think I tried to do that a little bit with creative writing for fiction, and it was just completely impossible. I just couldn't do it. So it's very, very different,
I was wondering how you managed to focus on driving and dictate something like that.
Yeah, just pretending I was talking to somebody. I just pretended I was talking to somebody on the phone. Basically, it's all these questions people would ask me about changing careers. So I just kind of, in my head, decided, all right, well, I'm speaking to somebody on the phone, and I just dictated it. And I got it done. It was pretty amazing, actually, that I was able to do that. I was so pleased that I was able to do it that way. But yeah, with fiction, I can't imagine somebody could get away with that. When I'm writing fiction, I'm just so absorbed. I think I wouldn't have stayed on the road for very long. I think if I was
yeah. I mean, I'm sure that there's someone who has done it, but
Sure.
I don't think I would recommend it.
No. Those really exciting scenes, right? You get right to the climax of the book, and it's got to be hard to pay attention to everything else you're doing.
Or if you really get into the flow and then somebody cuts you off in traffic and completely throws you out, that would absolutely break me.
Exactly.
But and it's also, I know transcription is not cheap.
Yeah. Oh, I definitely I spent some money on that. So
yeah. But if it works and you can afford to do it, more power to you.
Yeah, that was a one-time deal for me. So,
do you still dictate your writing?
No, I don't. I don't. I think I should, and I keep telling myself that, but I don't. I mostly sit down at the computer and type.
I just wondered because I've noticed when I was dealing with the wrist issues, people were saying, "Oh, you should dictate," especially because it was the last year of my MFA program, and so I had to be able to keep typing and working on my book and everything. And I found the process so different, and I wasn't sure I liked it. I think when you're used to doing something on the keyboard, I think the process is different somehow as it goes through your neural circuitry. And
I think so.
And I just never became a fan, which is why I was especially thrilled that someone could fix my wrist and I didn't have to force myself to become a fan. So you've noticed the same thing?
Yeah, definitely. I don't know why, but I think maybe because I'm so visual that I think it helps to see the words on the page as I'm coming up with the next words. I think somehow that's part of it. A lot of it's just habit too. I think I think yeah, if someone took my computer and said you can't use it anymore, I'd find another way.
That's a good point. Yeah. And we do tend to be very adaptable creatures, human beings. So we
Yeah.
probably would adapt if we had to. But I'm hoping I don't ever have to.
Right, exactly. That's right. Nobody ever wants to adapt, I think.
No.
Maybe in theory they do, but I
Don't
think
make me
in reality.
change. Change is evil and hard. I don't want to
And
do
change is
it.
scary. Change is scary. That's right.
So, how did you make the transition from medical communication into writing actual novels and doing that as a bigger chunk of your time?
Well, basically, I was fortunate. I was able to sell the company that I had started over the last few years. So that happened in two stages: 2018, and then this past summer, 2022. But in the middle of that, I was able to phase out of the company, so believe it or not, on March 13th, 2020, right as the world was caving in on us, that was my last day at the office,
Oh,
and my plans were to write and to become a full-time novelist at that point. Also to travel a little bit, to go to some concerts and go to some sporting events, and everything else went away. And so I started writing up a storm. I became extremely productive during that difficult time for all of us. They're just we all had to adapt. There wasn't too much to do. We had to find
right.
those things we could do, and writing was definitely one of them for me.
It's so interesting because I'm wondering now how many pandemic writers there are, writers who were born of the pandemic. I talked to a girl a couple months ago who is probably 15 by now. I think she was 14 then. And she started writing novels during the pandemic because she had nothing else to do. Told her parents she was playing video games. And then, emerges with this finished novel. And, hey, mom and dad, I wrote a book when I told you I was playing video games.
Aren't you supposed to do the complete opposite? Aren't you supposed
Right?
to say I'm working writing a book and then you play the video games on the side? That's pretty admirable. That's impressive.
Yeah, she's written a pile
I
of
like
books
that.
and published them and the whole
Wow,
deal. And
that's great.
the two of you can't be the only two. There must be a
Right.
whole
Oh yeah.
a whole unknown club of people who turned into full-fledged novelists during the pandemic.
No doubt about it. I'm sure there are a lot.
So, we talked a little bit about whether or not your parents encouraged you as a kid, but since you made this massive change a whole lot later, did you get a lot of pushback from people? Or were they at that point kind of like, well, if you can afford to do it, knock yourself out?
When I wanted to write full time, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
No pushback at that point. In fact, I was surprised at how many people knew that that's exactly what I wanted to do. Because it's not like I was running around the whole time complaining about what I was doing at the time. I've enjoyed really the different aspects of my career along the way. But multiple people said, "Oh, you've wanted to do that since you were young, since you were in college or high school or when you were a little kid, depending on how long they knew me." And that, I guess, validated it a little bit further for me that I've always wanted to do this.
That's great. It has me
Yeah,
thinking about how we treat these kind of aspirations differently depending on the age of the person expressing them. When you're a kid, it's like it's fine when you're, in grade school, maybe when you're in high school, but then you have to grow up and get serious and do something that makes money.
yeah,
And and even in college, but when you're older and somebody can say, yeah, you've wanted to do this forever, suddenly it becomes, this is totally what Michael needs to do because he's wanted to do it forever. It
yeah.
seems a little odd to me that we differentiate that way.
I think you're right. I definitely agree with you. At the same time, though, I look back and now that I'm doing this full time, I've kind of wondered, wow, could I have done this at different other time points in my life? And I don't know. I think to be successful as a novelist takes a while.
Hmm.
And so I think there are different sacrifices that people make along the way to make that dream happen, and some of them get going on it right out of the gate. Some are really fortunate, and maybe they're a big success right away. But I think more often there are probably more people out there that kind of struggle through it, or need to go through the learning curve, or just the put in the whatever those 10,000 hours or whatever you need to be able to be good and then hopefully successful in various ways and earn an income, I guess, to make it work. And so when I look back at the different key milestones in my career, I'm not so sure I would have gotten away with this, because I need the time. I'm getting better with every book that I write. And so I don't know if I would have been a success out of the gate when I was in my 20s or when I changed careers in my 30s.
That's an interesting point, not least because probably what you would have written then is very different than what you would write now, just because life experience makes a huge difference.
And that's also definitely true. Yeah. It's also funny, I've written a couple of short stories recently, and it's hard for me to remember some of those experiences now that I was trying to write about. So, but I think there are certain hot topics at different points in your life, and things that get you excited to write about at different points in your life. And sometimes when you try and force fit them at a different time in your life, it is more difficult at times.
Definitely. So take us through the process of, what you decided to write when to end up where you are now. Because I know you have a whole range of different areas and genres that you've written in.
Sure. I mentioned the short stories, so that's been kind of an ongoing thing throughout my life. As far as the novels, I wrote, as a physician, I guess it's probably not a surprise. I started with a medical thriller. And so I wrote this book called Extinction it takes place in the Arctic at a woolly mammoth research station. And the researchers there start to die quickly from a mysterious disease. And so this doctor gets sent from the United States to go up to the research station and try and figure out what's going on. And within a short amount of time, he's in just as much, if not more trouble than everybody there. And so they're kind of racing against the clock to figure out what's going on while all these various awful forces are converging on them. So that was the first one. And that I think I finished that one in 2010. I think the Amazon date on that is like 2012 or 13, because that's when maybe I launched it or something, but it was around that time. But that one took a while. I was writing these on the side, so that one took years to write, and I probably had the idea many years before that and kind of slowly chipped away at it, and then finally put it into book format.
Are you a real stickler for making it all medically accurate, or do you take liberties in the name of writing fiction?
No, I'm a stickler for making it medically accurate. And I, the amount of research I do for every single little thing that I put in, I on any book, it doesn't have to be medical. I just want to get it exactly right. It gets frustrating for people if they're reading something. They start to question other things in the book, I think, if they see some things in there that don't make sense, or that maybe they're more of an expert on and they're inaccurate. It's hard though to nail all these things down. It could be just about anything in a book that can burn you if you get it wrong. So yeah, no, I'm pretty careful with the medical information, and even the books I've written that aren't medical thrillers have had fairly reasonably involved medical aspects to them. There's something medical going on with some of the characters and that type of thing. And I think for me, it's easy to kind of throw in something like that, some kind of medical condition or something that makes it, that poses an additional challenge for a character as they're going through.
Yeah, that gives you, your background gives you a lot of stuff to draw on for ideas for things like that, which is really cool.
Definitely. Yeah. There's a lot to draw on. I did after that, a few years later, I had this idea Well, I've always been really interested in the power of the media, both positive and some of the pitfalls of the power of the media. And I I always find it interesting to watch how media coverage works around a really big event or some kind of issue that's going on. And so I wrote this book called The Satin Strangler Blogs. Actually, I wrote it online in blog format on websites, on blog sites originally. And eventually I took that and published it as a book as well. But basically, it's the story of a female serial killer told from the perspectives of 12 different bloggers. And you're never really in the mind of that accused person. You're just seeing everyone out there, some of whom are close to her, but many of whom are so far removed that they couldn't possibly know what they're really talking about. And so I tell this story, and you follow what happens with this character from the perspectives of these 12 bloggers. And I created these 12 full-blown blog sites that have far more blogs on them than my story. But I then mapped it out so that you could follow the story blog post by blog post. And at the end of each blog post, there's a link that takes you to a completely different blog site. And you gradually leapfrog through the internet universe and read the 105 blog posts that make up the chapters of the book. And so I did that, and then people said, "Well, can I read it as a book?" So I took what I thought was this really cool, creative thing that I created this whole universe of on the internet, and I took all those posts and I put them in order and I put them into a book, so I really love that story. But now that it's in a book, when people read the book, the way I've written it kind of throws them off a little bit. So I usually don't recommend to people that be the first book of mine that they read, because they'll wonder if I write all my books like that. The other three are traditional novels with traditional perspectives and that kind of thing. But this one was kind of really a full-blown creative process to pull this thing together.
Yeah, I mean that's quite an undertaking and a really cool idea. And there must have been people who, were perfectly happy to read it there.
Yeah, I mean it's set up pretty well to do that. I think one of the things that can happen to people is they can't read the whole thing in a sitting. So unless you somehow log where you are when you stop reading, it can be hard to get back in. So that was a logistical challenge with doing that. And I also have it online though, where you can just keep clicking and the screen changes and you kind of feel a little bit like you're on a different blog site, but not exactly. So there's that version too. But sometimes too, I think I created this because I really just needed to do it this way. And I really thought it would be really cool. And I'm very proud of what I did. At the same time, I can see why it's not everybody's favorite thing to read or everybody's favorite way to read either. So after that, I went back to writing more traditional novels.
Sure.
That's what I'd written. I'd written the Career Change book and those two novels before 2020. And then I've written two novels since then, and I have a third that's complete now that I'm about to query out to agents. After leaving my job, basically my day job, I had a whole bunch of book ideas, and I still have a whole bunch of book ideas that I scribbled down over the years and kept in a file. And so I wrote a book first called Woods, which is I'm not sure if you're familiar with geocaching, but it's basically there's an app to help you out. But basically everywhere around us, just about everywhere, people have hidden these little treasures, these little canisters of different kinds with different items in them. And so the idea is that you use this GPS tracker system. You go, in many cases, you're on a hike, but it's even in cities. You can find them on a corner underneath a pipe or something. Someone's hidden these little canisters. And so you go, you find it, you can swap out the item for something of greater value and put something else in there, or just log in on a little piece of paper when you found it, and then you're supposed to go back and confirm for other people that it was still there and it's intact and that kind of thing. So of course, enjoying thrillers, I took this wonderful family activity, and I thought, how cool would it be if I took some kind of city slicker kind of kids from New York City, sent them up to the North Woods of Maine to go geocaching to find the latest novel, actually the last novel of their favorite horror fiction writer. And so this fictitious character has hidden the novel in multiple geocaches over the course of like 30 to 40 miles up in the North Woods. And so you can go up there and theoretically, fictitiously, and hike through and find the different chapters of the book. And that's how you read this person's book. And of course, I send these characters up there. They have enough money. These kids have enough money. They kind of, all lie to their parents saying where they are, and nobody's parents are paying attention. And they take a flight in a helicopter up to this remote place where the only way out is to hike these 30 to 40 miles out through completely desolate forests. And so, of course, while they're geocaching to find these things, the geocaches start to be kind of bizarre, and then they realize someone's following them. And then the book goes forward from there. And when I wrote this one, all I knew is that I wanted to send these kids into the woods in the middle of nowhere, have them only have one way out, and bring in the geocache thing, because I thought that was really cool. And then sick this this horrible person on them in the middle of the woods. And I had no idea whether they were going to get out, who was going to get out, how they were going to get out. And I actually just wrote it without an outline and figured out where they were going and how they got out. And it was one of the more fun writing experiences of my life to try and work that out. And I actually did that with the last two books that I wrote, where I knew the first chapter, I kind of knew where I was headed, and then I started to write. And I know the writers out there are either outliners or pantsers, right? So this was a couple of pantser projects that I did. The other ones I really had to kind of figure out in advance, but these two I went by the seat of my pants, and I really enjoyed these last two.
It's really interesting that you've done some of each, because most people seem to land fairly firmly on one side or the other, though it makes sense that certain projects for you would require more outlining than others.
Definitely. And the next book I did was like that too. I just decided, all right, so that book was Woods, is what it's called. And then my fourth book, the latest, about a year ago, I released it, is Fugue, Fugue, which some people have never heard the word, other people have. But for that one, I knew I wanted to have and a bunch of these are young female protagonists that are really like these dynamic, strong female protagonists, which is really cool because I have 3 daughters, and so it's somehow this is where I've fallen into as far as some of my characters. But so this character, though, in Fugue is an older teenager, and like 18, 19, and she wakes up in a foreign country in a hospital. She's had some kind of brain surgery, has no idea what's happened to her, where she is, why she's there, or who she is, and is very, frightened about what's going on around her, and decides in the first couple of scenes to escape through the window of the hospital. And so she goes out into what it very quickly ends up being La Paz, Bolivia, where I've actually spent some time. And she tries to figure out who she is and where she came from and what she wants to be in life, essentially, as she moves forward, and gradually kind of sorts out the puzzle. And so with that one, I just knew that I wanted this person to wake up and have no idea who they were or why they were there, and take it from there. And it with both those, with Woods and with Fugue, I got to a point. I get to a point where I'm like probably like 120 pages in, and I really feel like for each book, I felt like I had something really special going on. But then I needed to stop and sit down and go, all right, where am I going with this? Because I wasn't just going to continue to free form it all the way to the finish line. I think that's extremely difficult. So I think it's got to happen to most pantsers, even that they reach a point where they say, all right, where am I heading? I need a sense of where I'm heading with this. And so I at least figured out those few aspects of where each of those books needed to go. And then I went back and wrote them. And I might have done just top line outlines on those, just some bullet points to make sure I was staying on track. But then this latest book, though, the one that I'm about to query out, is it's a fantasy novel, which is a real different type of novel for me, a totally different genre. And for this, I tried to write it as a pantser, ran into a lot of issues, had to back up, tried to write it again, had to back up, and then it ended up being an outline from scratch. And redoing the outline and rewriting from scratch. And so there are definitely times, and I have a feeling that moving forward, I'll probably outline. So I think that was an interesting lesson. You don't want to be 6 months into a project or so, or probably even more in this case. This is another idea I worked on off and on for years. And then to get to the point where I was thinking, oh boy, I've really got to kind of re-outline this and move forward is a challenge.
It's really interesting to me because I am definitely a pantser, and most of the pantsers that I know, it's more like you're outlining after the fact.
Yeah.
You have the manuscript and you're going, okay, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to reread this and start asking questions and see, oh, look, here on page 20, this thing happens that I completely forgot about by page 250 and wrote something totally different. And now I have to decide which one stays, which one goes, and make it all work. So yeah, I mean, I will sometimes have I know I have to get to X. But other than that, that's the closest I've ever come to outlining anything. So it's very interesting to me to hear the way that you kind of mix the two up.
Well, I found that as a pantser, I've had to go back and very heavily rewrite. And that's okay. I actually, this may sound weird. I love coming up with ideas, but I almost like the rewriting process even better than the initial draft process, because I feel like that's where the magic starts to work its way into the story. I think, I write the first draft knowing I've got something that's worthwhile, that's worth me spending a ton of time with, and spending a lot of time with those characters. But then it's not until the rewrite where I can tell how special the project is. And so I really love the rewriting. And in my career as within medical writing, and as I'm, advanced through different positions and eventually as the owner of the company, I was doing more review, strategic input, revision, that kind of thing than the actual initial draft. So I think I got really good at that, even though it was a different type of writing.
Sure. Yeah. And, good editing skills are good editing skills, no matter where you're putting them to use. But yeah, I always enjoy the process of going through the draft, and I always feel like it's like solving a puzzle or a mystery. It's like, which pieces go together? And,
it's what, having done it,
questions do I have now?
I really think it's so much fun to be a pantser.
Yeah.
because you discover it the same way the reader discovers it, almost as you're going through. And boy, I'll tell you, when I mentioned those times where I was about halfway into the book thinking, where does this go? Wow. When you figure out where you want to end up, it's so exciting. It's just I get goosebumps.
Yeah.
Just thinking about it.
Yeah. Especially when you're like, oh, look, it's all starting to come together in my head and I know exactly what's happening now.
Yeah.
I do not have the patience or the level of interest to be able to write from an outline for that reason, because if I knew what was going to happen,
Yeah.
why? And yet, some people have to do that because that's the way they work, and that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I've listened to so many podcasts with writers and watched so many interviews, and it's amazing how different everybody's approaches are, and some people do evolve over time. With the book that I am wrapping up now, I'm not sure if I'm really wrapping it up because other people hopefully are about to see it and comment on it, but I hired a book coach to work with, and so she's been great at adding. I consider myself to be ultra organized and really meticulous with things, but to have somebody who can add an extra layer of that, and someone who can really dig into the book and all, from through each of the steps in the process, outline and early drafts and whatever, and have really valuable input on it. It has really been a game changer. I think that my writing is getting better from that relationship and from that interaction.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I mean, and there's a world of difference between that and handing it to your best friend, no matter how well-intentioned they are, who doesn't do any kind of writing because they just don't see the same kinds of things, though there's merit in both of them. Your best friend may say, this part doesn't make any sense, and because they know something about it, and the book coach may not. So, yeah.
Yeah. Most of the people I have review things, the friends and family, they don't want to criticize too much, which unfortunately is, can make it tough. They're good at proofing, and then they all have some comments along the way. So I've actually, I changed the character's name recently because multiple people said, I really don't like that character's name. And then my daughters are really good. My daughters read so much, and they've really had some valuable input on a couple of the recent books, and very opinionated input as well. And so sometimes I'll you have to decide as the creator what input you're going to take and incorporate. And when my kids are pretty emphatic, I know they're probably right. So because they just read so much.
It's interesting. You're reminding me of a Neil Gaiman quote that I just came across again lately, and I don't have the exact wording, but basically is saying, remember that almost everything that a reader tells you needs to be fixed in your book needs to be fixed, but that almost every way that they'll tell you to fix it will be wrong.
I've heard. Yeah, you need to figure out what it is that's bothering them, because sometimes people can't express it exactly right, and that's where the book coach is just spot on. She'll say, "Here's the problem," and I'll go, "Oh my God, that's exactly what the problem is," and so that's really helpful. But yeah, that's why. But when people hone in on a certain scene or a certain chapter and go, having some problems with that, something's got to be fixed, and you need to figure out what it is. So that makes a lot of sense.
And I, always have to laugh at myself in those moments where, there's something that I've written and I really did it deliberately in a certain way to try to emphasize a certain thing or create a certain feeling or whatever I was trying to do. And somebody will say, what is this about? I don't know what you're trying to do here and whatever. And it's that kill your darlings moment, where it's like, but I really like that. And I worked really hard on that. And yet there's always that voice in the back of my head going, and they're right, because they wouldn't have said something if they understood what you were trying to do.
Oh yeah. Well, this current draft that I've got, it's it's been through a few iterations, and a couple of the earlier iterations had multiple perspectives, multiple characters, multiple perspectives. And then I decided I really wanted to write it from a single perspective. And so, when you do that, there are entire chapters, entire characters, entire everythings that either had to go away, or I needed to figure out how that character could realistically find out that information. And it's still a total rewrite on what ends up happening to allow them to do that. But yeah, that's a tough one. When you change the perspective,
Oh,
that caused some dramatic changes.
that's
But it was the
painful.
right thing to do. It's so the draft I'm working with is just infinitely better than, each draft has been so much better than the previous one because of the flexibility to just accept that something has to change. And killing your darling is very difficult.
Yeah. And you're also reminding me of how many things I have written, both fiction, nonfiction, I mean, even just like a report for work or something like that, where it just doesn't seem to work and you pound your head against it. And then you suddenly realize it's because I structured it wrong. I tried to set it up as this thing and it doesn't want to be that thing and it needs to change the point of view. It needs to, be ordered differently, whatever it is. And
Right.
and yet it's amazing once you figure out what that missing thing is, how much quickly it comes together because now it's being what it wants to be, for want of a better way to put it.
Sure. Yeah. You should see how many times I rewrite long emails.
Guilty as charged.
That's where sometimes I need to cut myself off. Only two revisions allowed on per email. But one of the other things we were talking about was that I do want to mention that's helped tremendously is I I used to get so hung up as I was drafting on what the exact right words were, and I would start to write, and I don't know, I would be talking about a certain car, and I would look it up online mid sentence. I'd go, oh well, that's a Corvette, but oh wait, what year do I want? And I would start researching, and I stopped doing that. I heard so many writers talking about separating their writer brain from their editorial brain. And to be able to create, I found that I can't be critiquing myself at the same time. And that's been a total game changer. I'm now willing to put down on a first draft any slop that I want to get onto the page to get myself going and to keep moving. And knock on wood, that's helped tremendously with any prior writer block type problems. And then I know I can revise it. I know I can fix anything I put down on the page. And then when I go through it again, yeah, I spend a lot of time sometimes trying to figure out exactly the right word. Or like I said, I research a ton to make sure I get the information right. But I don't allow myself to leave that page to go do those things while I'm drafting. So I keep the editor away.
There's magic in giving yourself permission to be imperfect.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tons of it, which of course can be very difficult to convince people of. but
It's
yeah, when
hard.
you let that go and you just say, I'm going to write a crappy first draft. I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with Anne Lamott's essay on shitty first drafts, which when I first encountered that about 25 years ago, it was almost like, the cliched ray of sunshine from the heavens.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like, wow, that is brilliant and perfect and absolutely wonderful and thoroughly correct.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I think all writers feel like everything they put down has to, it's got to be moving in a great direction, and they interfere with themselves. I certainly do that with myself, and I think so far successfully gotten away from doing that. And that's been a game changer, total game changer.
Yeah, I'm sure. So I wanted to give you a couple minutes to talk about the career change book because I'm sure that there are people who are asking themselves the very question that you tackled in it.
Sure. Yeah, so the career change book, like I said, that was the first one I wrote. I think that was early 2000s, maybe 2004, 2007, somewhere in that period. I think I worked on that. And it's called Do You Feel Like You Wasted All That Training? And even though that's grammatically, technically not exactly 100% correct, which I've been told many times over the years, that is the question that I heard from everyone when I was changing careers. And so I for a while I tried to figure out how to write the book, how to format it and all that. But then finally I decided, you know what, I'm just going to write this as answers to the questions I get asked by physicians who are considering alternative careers. And so forget how many questions there are in there, maybe 60 or so questions, but basically the book ends up following my career change process kind of from start to finish in ordered questions along the way. And what ended up coming out of that was, again, through the help of a family member, mentor, a physician who went into business, who spent a lot of time with me, we kind of gradually worked toward 5 stages to go through. And, so I don't know if I remember them all quickly, but introspection, exploration of what's out there, preparation to prepare yourself for what you might want, and then acquisition, applying for jobs, interviewing for jobs, that kind of thing, and then the actual transition at the end. And so I kind of walk through that. And I've also I have a website, PRN Resource. It's a Physician Renaissance Network, and there's a lot of information on there for doctors interested in changing careers. And through that, and through the book, and through a lot of connections, I've done a lot of speaking on that subject. And so I speak every year at a conference out in Chicago by a company run by a company called Seek, SEAK. They do a non-clinical careers course. So I spend a day on the panel out there each year. And then I've done speaking engagements at some pretty interesting places where doctors wanted to hear about alternative careers. And so I've gotten to travel a little bit, and I've gotten to do some speaking on that, which has been a lot of fun and really rewarding, because I feel like I've been able to really inform a lot of physicians about what their options are. And hopefully I try not to be the Pied Piper and convince everyone to leave practice, because I need medical care as much as anybody else, especially as time goes on. But, the first set of conversations, though, is about looking at what you're doing today and how you can make that situation better. And I think even that part of the conversation helps out a lot of doctors who don't necessarily want to do something different. So that's a lot of what I discuss with them as well. So that's been a side interest for many years, basically since I changed careers. There was nothing online. There were no organizations. There was almost really no source of information on the subject. So I saw a real need. So I've written a lot and spoken a bunch on this topic.
Well, you don't really hear, I think people assume that if you've gone and done all those years of med school and residency and everything else, that you're going to stick with it forever because you did invest all that time. Yeah. And I also have to imagine, and, you may have gone through this, that when you have invested all of that you, really kind of wonder, what did I do all of this for? And, do I really want to chuck it all in, or is it just a phase? Or, it has to be an interesting situation to be in, because you have that whole sunk cost of all of that time and money and training. And then to think about doing something different must seem kind of alien.
That's all absolutely correct. I think there's a huge psychological hurdle for doctors in thinking about doing something else for that reason. And then, and then there are all the people around you saying, "Oh, that's my friend, the doctor. Oh, that's my son, the doctor," So that makes it hard too. And then there were numerous people, and I write about this in the book, numerous people who just thought I was nuts, or wondered what was wrong with me, or various things like that. I mean, relatives who thought that, who were wondering why it was, what was the real reason I was thinking about doing it. So that's all difficult. And I think for doctors too, the other thing is that doctors go through a really linear path in preparing for their careers. In many ways, it's a difficult path, but in a lot of other ways, it's a really simple path, because there aren't a lot of branches in the path. You go to medical school, you do a residency, you get a job, and most people try and decide if they want to go into academics or private practice, and then they apply for jobs. And, while other people haven't figured out they want to be a doctor, maybe they want to do something else, have to go through a lot of branches in their thought process to figure out what that could be. But doctors then go through this whole linear process, and then they get however far into their careers or into medical school or residency and say, gee, I think I want to do something else. And then suddenly they have to completely change how they assess their career and try and figure out what the options are. And really, I think a lot of doctors, including myself, when I was looking at making career change, I was looking for a book to tell me how to do it, because everything else I knew was in the textbook somewhere. And that's how I learned everything up until that point. It's all in the textbook. And when you change careers, usually it's networking, it's exploration through different ways. There's not a book that says, hey, here's how you go from point A to point B. It doesn't really exist.
Yeah.
There are a lot of books like my book that can help people a little bit, but they're not going to tell them exactly how to do it. So it can really be difficult for doctors. But the interesting thing is that really, when you think about most people, most types of careers, I bet the vast majority of people change industries at one point or another. And it doesn't seem like it's a dramatic, life-altering type of event that everybody would question. And it seems like you're doing something really off the wall. But for some reason, with physicians, there is that feeling, and it's no different for them. They're in a job and they're thinking, well, geez, maybe I want to do a different job. Maybe I want to work for a different type of company or in a different area. But for them, it's a dramatic deviation. And I think it definitely feels like that to doctors. So
Sure.
It can be tough.
Well, it sounds like in your case, you didn't waste any of it because you keep using it in multiple different ways, whether it's informing the novels that you're writing or just helping to educate other doctors. So, it sounds like it's all come together nicely for you.
Yeah, so far so good. I'm enjoying it, and I'm really enjoying writing. It's really been great, and it was great when it was a hobby, and it's even better now that I'm doing more of it. And yeah, I'm incorporating really a little bit of everything, and I'm sure the same way anybody else does when they write. There's definitely some of the medicine in there. There is definitely some of my business knowledge and experience as a business owner, because every writer is essentially a business owner if they're treating it like a career, if it's a job for them. And so that's been helpful too.
Well, I'm glad that it's working out, and we'll be keeping an eye to see how it goes.
Thank you very much.
Well,
Appreciate
thanks
it.
for coming and talking with us.
Thank you. It's been great talking to you.
That's this week's episode. Thanks so much to Michael McLaughlin and to you for listening. Please leave a review for this episode. There's a link right in your podcast app. And in it, tell us about a time when you made a big shift in your life. If you enjoyed our conversation, I hope you'll share it with a friend. Thank you so much. If this episode resonated with you, don't forget to get in touch on any of my social platforms or even via email at nancy@fycuriosity.com and tell me what you loved. And if you're feeling a little bit less than confident in your creative process right now, and you haven't yet signed up for my free email series on 6 of the most common creative beliefs that are messing you up, please check it out. It'll untangle those myths and help you get rolling again. You can find it at fycuriosity.com, and there's also a link right in your podcast app. See you there, and see you next week. Follow Your Curiosity is produced by me, Nancy Norbeck, with music by Joseph McDade. If you like Follow Your Curiosity, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to tell your friends. It really helps me reach new listeners. Thanks.